ridiculous. So one of the things I would like you to do, and I stole this from the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, is to just think about, after you leave this session, what is it you're willing to do? Will you call the governor's office and ask for an increase in welfare grants for those who are attempting to flee trafficking or domestic violence? Can anybody here tell me what a parent and 2 children gets on TANF now, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, the welfare program in Kentucky? Does anybody know? You ought to know this number. Oh, you know, wonderful. 250? So in the range of 250. So for yourself and 2 children, can you even pay the rent? Of course not. But we have the nerve to keep asking, why don't people just leave violent relationships? Why don't they just leave somebody who's trafficking them or beating them up, an intimate partner or a stranger? Well, one reason is that welfare is our primary safety net. The perpetrator is not going to give us child support while we are fleeing. So I want you to retain that number 250. We'll find out the exact number, but 250 is a good number. So at least when somebody says to you, why don't these victims just leave, you have at least one answer. And what I teach the students in our clinic, in my criminal law class, in my family violence classes, and especially if you're going to argue before courts, but if you want to be persuasive in many contexts, you have to learn how to number your arguments. I know you're shocked to think that I might talk too much, but sometimes when I get into court, the judge will finally say, okay, Ms. Buel, I've heard enough, you can stop now. No, Your Honor, I've got 6 more points I want to make. Well, I've heard enough. But if I say, Your Honor, there are 8 reasons why our client should get custody. If I only get up to number 4 and I've gone off on 9 tangents, the judge will say, Ms. Buel, could you get to number 5 in this lifetime? Oh, yes, Your Honor, and then I'm back. So you see, when somebody says to you, why don't these victims just flee? I want you, this is like mad, snappy answers to stupid questions. Well, you know what? There are actually 5 good reasons why, or 15, and I've written an article for the Colorado Bar Journal called 50 Obstacles to Leaving, AKA Why Victims Stay. So in case you want to look that up, you can put my name into Google. You may have to go to Google Scholar, but anyway, you can download these. And so if you want 50 reasons, but you ought to at least know 5. And one of them is just money. Money is a good reason why we are not able to flee. We can't feed our children. The scariest moments for me as a survivor were not having a gun to my head. It was a 3rd night in a row feeding the kids macaroni and watered down ketchup and realizing we're out of macaroni. And even if I apply for emergency food stamps, they get 3 days to decide whether or not I'm eligible. And I learned that I was prepared to commit crimes to feed my children in the richest country in the world. But either fortunately, unfortunately, I have 2 older brothers who did time for drug dealing. One of them, Jeremy, who ended up getting murdered for that. So I said, okay, I'm not dealing drugs. But my mother cleaned houses. So I said, well, that's something I can do. So don't worry, the statute of limitations is run if anybody was about to do a citizen's arrest. It was a long time ago, and I'm not proud of it, but I committed welfare fraud because you cannot support yourself and your children on what they give you in welfare in any state in this country. Alaska pays the highest, $9.70. Any of you been to Alaska? The entire amount, even in June, it takes to pay the heat. So that's another story. But $250 in Kentucky. This is called a setup. Oh my goodness, I have 63 slides and we are just not going to get over. But we are going to put this on a few different websites here so you can download the whole thing and feel free to use it in any way that is at all helpful to you. So the sheer numbers ought to be compelling, and we'll start out with domestic violence because that is really the framework through which I am looking at trafficking. So the FBI, Department of Justice, tells us that 4 women per day continue to be killed by an intimate partner. And I have to think that if so-called foreign terrorists were coming in and killing 4 Americans per day, we'd fire up the F-16s, we'd have armed police officers, probably the National Guard, we'd reinstitute the draft, we would declare a state of crisis. That's where we ought to be in terms of violence against women. 4 women per day, 8 children a day. This is a crime we know how to stop. It's not like 1977 when I first started. And people said, we don't know what to do. We don't have any laws. Well, we've passed the laws. And now, as the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, who convened a group of us in Geneva in December from all over the world to say, okay, we got the laws. Now, how are we going to implement them? We have to get serious. And that's the conference that I'm going to from here at the University of Miami Law School, bringing together activists and law professors and scholars from South America, Central America, and parts of the US who are doing this work to begin actively strategizing. Okay, we've got a lot of the rules in place, but there clearly is a lack of enforcement, and we need help in enforcing because that's all about societal norms. Oh, I will just point out that it costs about $2.5 million to prosecute a domestic violence homicide. So I love the chapter in Casey Gwynn's book entitled, "Don't Buy the Lie You Can't Afford It." You want to start a family justice center, you want to endow a chair, you want to do some of the amazing work that you're doing here, you want to get your legislature to increase from the paltry $250 a day, you want to really help victims be able to flee. Don't buy the lie you can't afford it. Because as long as you've got these homicides occurring, it's cheaper to do the work ahead of time. So looking at definitions, most of you know these, but since a lot of my talk is looking at this correlation between family violence and human trafficking, I wanted to start out being clear about these. Now, my work did not originally involve human trafficking. That really wasn't on our agenda. I didn't think I would be getting into this work. And as has happened throughout my life, I really haven't planned any of this. These opportunities just fall in your lap, and what you have to do is be open to take them. To say, yes, what can I do to make this better? So it started out that we were having a number of very young women, girls, coming into our domestic violence clinic who were the partners of gang members in Texas. And word got out, you know, once you do a good job with something, the payment for that is you get more work in that area. But that was fine, because most people were not willing to assist them. They were saying it's just too dangerous. The first case we had, the young woman's partner went to prison for almost killing her, so attempted murder, because it's really hard to get anybody to go to prison for domestic violence crimes, right? You pretty much got to try to kill them. So he is in one of the largest gangs in Texas, and she is pregnant, she has the baby, and he's now coming out. And she's with somebody else. So of course he's enraged, and he has to kill this person. Well, the person she's now with is his half-brother who's in a different gang. So this is war. But as she explained to us, she says, "Ms. B, I am always going to have to be with someone in a gang, because there is nobody who will date me once they know who my baby's father is. I can't date anybody who isn't in a gang, right? I need that protection of what that gang is." So how do I explain this to the court, to the child custody evaluator, who's enraged that she's involved with another gang member? What is wrong with her? Okay, you help me do a safety plan. Of course, this is the same custody evaluator who told us that after we had had 3 women from Nigeria in our clinic, that he declared, women from Nigeria are crazy, crazy, because we ask them questions on our evaluation and they don't answer properly, right? So this is when you start figuring out, okay, how do we do cultural competence without calling it that? So we had to call it advanced custody evaluation. And then it just happens that some of the cases involve somebody from Nigeria and from other cultures, and then you get to work on some of these issues, but that's a whole other talk. So getting back to our correlations with gang activity, then we got to clients who were involved in trafficking. And all of a sudden there's this whole world that I really didn't know anything about, and realized I got to educate myself. I've got to find out. They were trafficked into this country, into Texas, from Mexico on the promise. So initially it starts out as smuggling, as happens in some cases. Do you want to make a lot of money? Well, they're from tiny little rural towns in Mexico. Do you want to come and work for a rich family in Texas, which their belief was everybody in America is rich. Anyway, all you have to do is clean 6 hours a day, and they will pay you a mint. You can live there or not, whatever you would like, but you're going to make a lot of money. You will make so much money you can send home to your family and help support them. Well, of course they're going to go for this option. So the police and the prosecutors were all upset about, well, when did this go from smuggling, and they're criminals because they're trying to get in this country illegally, when did it become trafficking? Well, let's look. And this is, we're very interested in this word coercion, because sometimes the police and the prosecutors want to focus on, was there a gun to their head? Was there a threat to kill them or their children? Because that's really what they want to hear if we talk coercion. So part of our job is also just to help people understand the nuances of what this victim has lived through, what impacted their decision. And even if you lose in one case, you say, okay, I have more to learn. Let me find people who are more familiar with what this person has gone through, and how do I educate the court, the social workers, child protective services, In every single one of these cases, Child Protective Services took the children. This is an unfit parent because they were trying to get in the country illegally, because they were prostitutes, because they were carrying drugs for someone, and trying to ask them. This is when it's so much fun to be a lawyer. It is so much fun, I can't even tell you. I was a court advocate for 10 years before finally getting to go to law school. When you have Child Protective Services on the witness stand and you get to turn the story around. Ma'am, if your child was starving, you have no food to feed your child, would you go out and sleep with someone who is going to give you the money to feed your children? No, I would never do that. So let me understand, you would let your child starve to death. No, I would do something else. Well, tell the jury what you would do, because I want to hear it. I want to hear it because we will share this information with domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking victims around the world, because we need your secret. Well, I guess I'd have to go to my family. Oh, well, that's a good idea. What if you don't have family? It's like this is incomprehensible to people, that you just wouldn't have any place to turn. Because we're not so good at helping people who are not, some of us aren't even good at helping people related to us. But this notion that you would help complete strangers is just anathema with many Americans, many people around the world. And that's a piece we have to change. We just have to change. This idea that if you've got some money and somebody else needs it, you ought to be willing to share it. It's pretty simple. And it's a fabulous way to live your life. I cannot tell you how much fun it is. And I love shoes and I love to shop. But you know, if you ever come to Phoenix, any of you who love shoes and love to shop, we have the only in the country Nordstrom Last Chance, it's called. And the stuff there, you can't return it. But for example, these are $185 shoes, $29.99. I'm telling you. You see, when you live right, what you need comes streaming toward you. And what I need a little shopping therapy every now and then. But I guess our creator figured out, okay, she wants to pay everybody's rent, she's trying to buy bus tickets and send these kids through school, but she loves shoes. Let me give her a few shoes, okay? So then he put me in that. Okay, how did I get off on Nordstrom Last Chance? I don't know. But, so human trafficking, growing problem. One aspect that I want to emphasize is the link with money laundering, drugs, and gun trafficking. And we're not saying in every single case. Some are small operations. It's one person who has managed to convince two women or one woman to come, or men from other countries and work and then coerce them. But many of these are now very, very lucrative and large scale. What the drug and gun traffickers have figured out is if I sell you a kilo of cocaine, it's gone. I can't make that money again. Sell you the guns, money's gone. But I can enlist you in prostitution or working for me and I get the money and all I have to do is keep you terrified enough to keep turning over your paycheck. This is a pretty good deal. I've got money coming in on an ongoing basis. So throughout the world, we are hearing huge cartels getting involved. One of the things that happened in I was thinking I had a document camera like this is my classroom. But so one of the things the Attorney General in Arizona did over the last few years was they sued Western Union. You may have heard of this for money laundering because they were processing huge amounts of money, not reporting it to the feds. Of course, that's not their story, so I probably shouldn't say it that way. But that's what the court decided. And there was a $50 million fine set aside. So we've now set up something called the Southwest Border Anti-Money Laundering Alliance. And so part of my job now is I want some of this money. I want some of this money for trafficking victims. Now the way the settlement was arranged is they really want it for law enforcement and prosecution of the those who are committing money laundering crimes. So part of our job is to make this connection for them between human trafficking and money laundering and the drug cartels and the gun trafficking that we know also goes on around the world. So there's a lot of money out there to do this work. $50 million? Oh, my brain, I can barely sleep at night thinking about how to spend this money for them. How many of you have ever heard of Delancey Street Foundation? This whole square block in San Francisco where Mimi Silbert, about 30 years ago, she realized that nobody would hire ex-cons. And so they started a company where they would just hire them. I think it was a moving company. It has now grown, and they don't get a dime of federal, state, or local money. They now have this entire square block, and on the ground floors are all these businesses.